Dawn came softly over the camp, thin light bleeding through fog, dissolving the sharp outlines of fences and watchtowers until everything seemed suspended between dream and waking. The loudspeaker crackled alive before the sun had fully risen, startling the sparrows perched along the barbed wire. Voices stirred inside the rows of khaki tents, murmurs rising like the low hum of a distant tide. Then came the announcement, flat and official, carried by a wind that smelled faintly of coffee and diesel. All female prisoners will gather by the flagpole. You may all have your freedom, but if you wish to stay, sign the agreement. The United States Army will provide food, clothing, and protection in exchange for marriage to an American soldier. For a moment, silence held everything in place, the spoons in the tin cups, the breath in each chest, the fragile heartbeat of disbelief. Then came the sound of canvas rustling, of boots scuffing dirt floors, of a world trying to understand its own absurd mercy. Freedom, they said. But freedom had come dressed as an ultimatum. Elsa Brenner sat on the edge of her cot, her fingers tangled in the hem of her skirt. She was 27, though the war had made her face older in ways mirrors could not explain. Once, she had been a nurse near Bremen, a Red Cross volunteer who learned how to smile even when stitching the wounds of men who cursed her country's defeat. Now, inside this American camp in Texas, she was simply Prisoner 451. The number stitched to her sleeve had faded, but its weight remained. She looked toward the flap of the tent, where sunlight fell in a perfect square upon the dirt. Outside, the world looked washed clean, as if someone had wrung the color out of the earth. A few women were already stepping out, straightening their borrowed dresses, whispering the same question. Is it real? Are we free? Others remained seated, unmoving, as if freedom might be another trick of translation. Near the flagpole, the camp had assembled into a hesitant sea of faces. American officers stood behind a folding table, neat stacks of papers beside them, each one fluttering slightly in the breeze like wings unsure of flight. The women gathered in small clusters, former clerks, translators, farmhands, widows, all tethered by the invisible string of displacement. Some had lost everything in Germany, homes flattened by bombs, brothers unaccounted for, parents gone to ashes. An officer adjusted his hat and began reading the terms aloud, his voice firm but not unkind. You are free to return home, if you choose. Transport will be arranged to the ports in New York or New Orleans. However, if you wish to remain, you may sign here. In return, the Army guarantees lodging, meals, clothing, and the opportunity to marry an American serviceman. A low murmur rippled through the crowd, astonishment mixed with uneasy laughter. It sounded too much like a fairy tale told by the victors. Behind them, the fences glittered with dew, each droplet catching the light like a secret unwilling to vanish. Elsa's friend Marta leaned close. Marriage, she whispered, half laughing. After all this, they offer us husbands. Her tone was bitter, but her eyes betrayed something softer, an exhaustion that resembled hope. Elsa said nothing. She thought of Bremen, of the crater where her apartment once stood, of her mother's last letter that smelled faintly of smoke. She imagined stepping off a ship into the ruins, walking streets where her language would be met not with greeting but with blame. She remembered the hunger, the kind that didn't just empty the stomach but hollowed the soul. Nearby, a group of American soldiers watched, curious but respectful. They were young, sunburned, their uniforms creased with routine. One of them, tall, freckled, with a grin that seemed permanently uncertain, kept glancing toward Elsa's line. He carried a clipboard but no weapon, only the faint awkwardness of a man who knew victory had cost something too heavy to celebrate. Inside Elsa's chest, two worlds collided. The Germany of her memories, gray skies, church bells, snow falling on rubble, and this strange new land that smelled of cornbread and gasoline. One was home, but broken, the other foreign, but whole. The first woman stepped forward. She was young, no more than 20, with hair the color of corn silk. Her voice trembled as she said, "I'll stay." The officer nodded, handed her a pen. She signed, and the scratch of ink seemed louder than the distant engines beyond the fence. One by one, others followed. Some cried quietly, some smiled with defiant calm, some looked as if they were signing a surrender that felt too familiar. When it was Elsa's turn, her legs refused to move at first. She stood there, hands clasped, feeling the weight of everyone's gaze, the soldiers, the women, even the wind waiting for her decision. She thought of her father, once a teacher of Latin, who had said, "Freedom is not what they give you, it's what you can bear." She wondered if he would forgive her for what she was about to do. She stepped forward. The freckled soldier watched her, eyes gentle, uncertain. The paper trembled on the table. The pen was heavier than she expected, as if it carried the burden of translation between two fates. She signed, Elsa Brenner. Her handwriting wavered halfway through, then steadied, like a heart learning a new rhythm. The officer smiled politely. "You'll be reassigned to domestic work," he said. "Maybe teaching English, maybe sewing. We'll see." His words were efficient, bureaucratic, and yet there was kindness in them, the sort of kindness born from pity, not equality. As Elsa turned to leave, the freckled soldier lifted his hand in an uncertain salute, half wave, half farewell. She nodded back, unable to tell if she was grateful or ashamed. That evening, the camp felt different. The fences seemed farther away, the air lighter. Some women laughed around the cookhouse, tasting biscuits sweetened with syrup. Others sat alone, staring at the sunset bleeding across the Texas sky, the color of memory before it fades. Elsa sat on the wooden steps of the infirmary, watching shadows stretch long across the yard. Somewhere, a radio played a swing tune, cheerful and cruel in its normalcy. She thought of home again, but the image blurred, the streets too quiet, the faces too thin. She remembered the warmth of the bread served at lunch, the strange softness of the American blankets. Survival, she realized, could be another form of captivity. Night came without ceremony. The stars appeared above the camp like holes punched through dark cloth, and the wind carried the faint scent of rain. Elsa looked up, whispering a word she hadn't spoken in months. Freiheit. Freedom. It sounded foreign on her tongue, fragile and weightless. Somewhere beyond the fence, a train whistle echoed, long and low, a reminder that the world was moving again. She didn't know whether it was heading homeward or away. All she knew was that she had signed her name to a future she could neither refuse nor fully believe in. And as the camp lights dimmed one by one, Elsa realized that freedom, when it finally came, did not roar, it whispered. The days that followed the announcement moved slowly, like pages turning in a damp book. Morning reveille still sounded through the camp, but it no longer carried the same authority. The barbed wire no longer looked like a barrier, it looked like a decision. Beyond it lay Germany, or what remained of it. Inside lay America, or something pretending to be it. The women awoke each morning in a world divided by breakfast and memory. Elsa began working in the infirmary tent again, washing linen and wrapping small cuts that soldiers earned from their daily routines. The American sergeant, his name was Jack, she'd learned, came by often, his clipboard always tucked beneath his arm. He wasn't a doctor, just a man assigned to moral welfare. He had a habit of whistling under his breath, a tune that seemed to know it didn't belong here. When he spoke to Elsa, he was careful with his words, as if every syllable might shatter the fragile truce between captor and captive. "How do you like the camp's cooking?" he asked once, handing her a box of gauze. "It reminds me of peace," she said softly. "Everything here tastes of it." Jack smiled, unsure whether to take that as gratitude or irony. The camp was transforming. A row of new wooden huts was being built where tents once sagged under the Texas sun. The officers called them accommodations. The women called them waiting rooms for the uncertain. Some of the former prisoners now wore dresses instead of uniforms, washed their hair with American soap that smelled faintly of lilac. There were English classes in the afternoons, sewing circles in the evenings, and on Sundays, the chaplain played hymns on a portable organ that seemed too small for its burden. Still, the decision lingered in the air like the dust after a passing truck. Every woman had to choose, leave for a homeland in ruins or stay in a country that never asked for them. Marta, who had once laughed at the idea of marriage to a soldier, began sitting near the fence at dusk, staring toward the horizon as if she could see her family's old farm through the shimmer of heat. "I dreamed of my brother," she told Elsa one evening. "He said the cows died first, then the people. He said the snow fell black that winter." Elsa didn't know how to comfort her. Dreams had become another form of rationed memory. Letters arrived now and then, each one a ghost. Some came from Germany, written on scavenged paper in trembling ink. Others came from American families thanking the army for reforming the enemy. One afternoon, a girl named Hilda received a letter saying her town had ceased to exist, burned, erased, resettled. She folded it carefully, as if grief needed to be stored neatly. In the mess hall, talk shifted daily. Some swore they'd return home no matter what. Others said they'd rather die than face the hunger again. The Americans, for their part, seemed equally unsure what to feel. Many had lost friends in the war and looked at these women as reminders of everything they'd fought against. And yet, day by day, the hostility melted into awkward familiarity. Jack sometimes joined Elsa at the edge of the compound where the camp garden grew. The vegetables, though stunted by the dry soil, were a small miracle. Beans, tomatoes, and once, a single cabbage that became the talk of the week. He crouched beside her one afternoon, brushing dirt from his palms. "They're saying most of you will be released soon. Ships are leaving in February." Elsa kept her eyes on the soil. "And if someone doesn't want to go?" Jack hesitated. "Then she stays. But not as a prisoner." She looked up, her eyes catching his. "Then what does she become?" He didn't answer. The wind took his silence and turned it into motion. That evening, as the sun bled orange over the barracks, Elsa heard laughter, Real laughter, from near the canteen. A group of women were tasting Coca-Cola for the first time, their faces lighting up with shock and delight. Marta spat hers out, coughing, then giggled until she cried. It was the sound of something human waking again. Even the guards smiled. For one fragile hour, nobody remembered who was supposed to hate whom. But the illusion never lasted long. A new list was posted outside headquarters. Transport orders, East Coast departures. Elsa's name wasn't on it. She stood reading the list until the letters blurred. Beside her, Marta's hand trembled as she traced her own name. "Home," she whispered, though her voice carried no joy. That night, Elsa lay awake listening to the crickets hum beyond the fence. In her mind, she imagined the journey back, the docks filled with weary faces, the gray Atlantic swallowing the sky. She imagined the train through shattered cities, the smell of wet bricks and coal smoke. Somewhere in those ruins, a place might still call itself hers. Yet when she pictured herself there, she felt nothing but cold. The next morning, the women assigned to departure stood by the gate with small bundles of belongings. A truck waited to take them away. Marta hugged Elsa tightly, her breath catching. "You'll come later," she said. "When the world is ready for you again." Elsa nodded, though she knew the world had stopped waiting a long time ago. When the truck pulled out, a cloud of dust followed it down the road, blurring everything behind it. Elsa watched until it vanished. Around her, the camp seemed emptier, the air too still. That afternoon, Jack found her sitting alone by the vegetable patch. He crouched beside her again, resting his hands on his knees. "You didn't go," he said quietly. "There was nowhere to go," she replied. "Only back." He nodded, his jaw tightening. "Then maybe this is forward." She looked at him, searching for sincerity, and found it, not in his words, but in the weary kindness behind them. Days turned into weeks. The winter wind swept down from the plains, carrying the smell of rain and rust. The camp grew quieter, its population shrinking as ships departed. Elsa worked longer hours, translating for the officers, teaching the younger girls how to read English signs. At night, she found herself humming along with the American songs on the radio. It frightened her that she knew the melodies now. One evening, Jack walked her back to her hut after a meeting. The floodlights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows on the ground. At the door, he stopped. "They're saying some of you might be offered residency. It's not official yet." Elsa looked up at him, her breath visible in the cold air. "And what would that make us?" He smiled faintly. "Maybe Americans. Maybe something new." She said nothing. But later, when she lay in bed and heard the faint rustle of the camp at rest, she realized that the war had finally ended, not with a bang, but with a choice. And that choice, fragile as paper, was now hers to bear. Spring arrived like an apology. The hard wind softened, grass pushed through the clay, and for the first time in months, Laughter drifted freely through the camp without sounding defiant. The barbed wire still glimmered in the sun, but it had begun to lose its authority. It was part of the scenery now, as harmless as the telephone poles beyond. Most of the women who chose to leave were gone. Those who remained were no longer called prisoners. The guards had been replaced by clerks, the officers by chaplains and matrons. The camp itself seemed unsure of what it was supposed to be, a holding ground, a sanctuary, or something stranger altogether. Elsa lived now in one of the wooden huts at the far end of the compound, a small structure that smelled of pine and starch. She had a bed with clean sheets, a small window that looked out toward the wheat fields, and a radio that played swing music at night. The war felt distant, like a fever remembered rather than endured. She worked daily in the canteen, serving meals to both the soldiers and the few women who had chosen to remain under American care. She no longer wore the gray dress of a prisoner. Instead, she wore an old American uniform shirt tucked into a pleated skirt, her sleeves rolled up, her hair tied neatly in a bun. To the passing eye, she might have looked like a secretary or a teacher, someone ordinary, someone free. But inside, she carried the quiet ache of someone living between definitions. She was no longer German in the way she once was, yet not American enough to belong. Every day she crossed invisible lines, between guilt and gratitude, memory and rebirth. Jack still came by often, though now he was out of uniform, working with the Civilian Reconstruction Office. He had a way of blending in, of softening the rough edges of military order. Sometimes he brought her small gifts, a tin of peaches, a worn novel, a pencil sharpened to a perfect point. He never spoke of romance, not yet, but something unspoken hung between them like the lingering scent of tobacco in the evening air. Once, while washing dishes, Elsa heard him humming the same tune she used to hum as a girl, Lily Marlene. It startled her. The melody had once belonged to every side of the war, a ghost song drifting through radios across continents. She looked up from the sink, water dripping from her hands. "You know that song?" she asked. He smiled. Everyone did, even the ones pretending not to. That night, for the first time, she allowed herself to hum it again. By June, the camp held fewer than 40 women. Weddings began quietly, sometimes without rings, often without witnesses beyond the chaplain and a few curious soldiers. The brides wore dresses sewn from old bedsheets or tablecloths, and yet there was beauty in the simplicity. White cloth against sunburned faces, hands trembling as they reached for something both forbidden and hopeful. Elsa helped prepare many of those weddings. She mended hems, braided hair, found flowers by the fence. Each ceremony felt like watching someone cross a border she could not see. Marta wrote once from Germany. Her letter was short, smudged with rain. "The town is gone," it read. "They say peace has come, but I can't find it. The bakery is rubble. The church bells are silent. You were right to stay." Elsa read it 3 times, folded it neatly, and hid it inside her pillowcase. She never wrote back. Jack proposed in late summer, though not in the way fairy tales describe. He was awkward, hesitant, holding his hat in his hands like a confession. "They're changing the program," he said. "The War Brides Act. It'll let you go with me, if you choose." Elsa stared at him. For a long moment, the sound of crickets filled the silence between them. "Go with you where?" "Home," he said simply. "Kansas. My father's farm. Wheat, not war." She laughed softly, though her eyes filled with tears. "I've never even seen Kansas on a map." He shrugged. "Neither have most people." The wedding was small, 5 guests, a borrowed dress, and a cake baked from cornbread mix. Elsa walked down the aisle of the chapel tent, her steps careful, her breath steady. The air smelled faintly of dust and soap. When the chaplain asked if she would take this man, she said yes without trembling. It wasn't a word of surrender this time, it was a word of arrival. Afterward, they danced under the open sky. A gramophone played an old Benny Goodman record, and someone lit sparklers left over from the 4th of July. The soldiers cheered, the women clapped, and Elsa leaned her head on Jack's shoulder, her bare feet sinking into the cool dirt. For the first time, the fences seemed invisible. Yet freedom had its shadows. Not everyone in town looked kindly upon the enemy brides. When they ventured outside the camp, Elsa could feel the stares, some curious, others cold. Once, in a general store, a woman refused to hand her change directly, placing it instead on the counter. Jack said nothing, but his face hardened with quiet shame. At night, Elsa would sit by the window, the radio low, watching the moon climb over the barracks. She missed the language of her childhood, the soft vowels, the untranslatable lullabies. Sometimes she whispered them to herself, not out of longing but to remind herself that she had once existed elsewhere. One evening, as autumn crept back into the air, she walked past the old infirmary where she had first signed her name months ago. The table was gone, the papers gone, the officers gone. Only the echo of that morning remained, the sound of pens scratching, the breath of women choosing between hunger and a new life. She stood there a long time, feeling the weight of that decision settle into her bones like the chill of early frost. Behind her, Jack called her name. She turned, her face half in shadow, half in moonlight. "I was just remembering," she said. He nodded. "Then remember this too. You're not a prisoner anymore." She smiled faintly. "No. But freedom doesn't always feel like freedom." That night, as they walked back toward the cabin, the wind carried the scent of burning leaves from a nearby field. Elsa paused, breathing it in. It reminded her of Germany, of the fires that once burned not for warmth but for survival. Yet this fire was different. It spoke of harvest, of endings that promised beginnings. When they reached the porch, she stopped and looked up at the sky. The stars seemed closer here, almost within reach. "It's strange," she murmured. "The more I stay, the further away home feels." Jack slipped his hand into hers. "Then maybe that's how you know you've found another." She didn't answer. The words lingered in the night like smoke, rising, fragile, unresolved. And somewhere above the dark horizon, a single star flickered, faint but steady, as if refusing to choose between fading and burning on. The train that carried Elsa westward cut through the land like a blade through parchment, dividing past from future, memory from reinvention. She sat by the window with her chin resting on her gloved hand, watching the fields unfold in endless gold. The hum of the wheels was hypnotic, a rhythm that sounded almost like breathing. Jack dozed beside her, his head tilted back, his hat resting on his lap. She envied his peace. For him, the journey meant returning home. For her, it meant leaving every version of herself behind. When the train finally slowed, Kansas appeared, flat, sunstruck, and vast beyond comprehension. The air smelled of hay and distance. Jack helped her down, his hand firm, reassuring. "This is it," he said with a shy grin. "Doesn't look like much, but it grows on you." She smiled politely, but inside she felt small, a misplaced photograph in a stranger's album. The farmhouse in the distance looked weathered but proud, its white paint fading under years of sun. A windmill turned lazily nearby, creaking like an old memory refusing to die. Life in Kansas was quiet at first. Too quiet. The mornings began with the rustle of wheat against the porch steps, the distant crow of roosters, the smell of coffee rising from the kitchen. Jack worked long hours in the fields, and Elsa learned to bake bread that rose too high and too fast in the dry air. The neighbors were courteous but cautious, their smiles polite, their curiosity sharper than kindness. Some pretended not to notice her accent, others commented on it as if it were a stain she couldn't wash off. Jack's mother, a widow with hands worn from decades of harvest, watched her closely. "You keep things tidy," she said one afternoon, her voice neutral. "That's good. But around here, people remember." Elsa didn't ask what they remembered. She knew. Every American mother who had buried a son could not easily welcome a German bride, even one who had never held a gun. At night, when the house fell silent, Elsa would stand by the window and look at the stars. They were the same constellations she had known in Germany, the Hunter, the Swan, the Northern Crown, yet they looked different here, lonelier somehow. The sky felt wider, as if her thoughts might get lost before reaching heaven. Some nights she whispered in German, soft and steady, words that meant nothing to anyone else in the house. She didn't pray, she remembered. Months passed, and with them came the rhythm of routine, laundry flapping in the wind, the clatter of dishes, the creak of the porch at dusk. Yet beneath the ordinary surface, something was shifting. Elsa had started teaching local children to read German hymns, an idea Jack had suggested when the church needed help. At first, the parents hesitated. Then they realized she spoke with patience, not pride, and soon the classroom filled. The children liked her calm voice, her habit of rewarding effort with cookies that tasted faintly of cinnamon. Slowly, the suspicion around her began to dissolve. Still, not everyone softened. At the general store, two men once made a crude joke under their breath, loud enough for her to hear. "War bride," one sneered. "Guess not all prisoners stayed behind bars." Jack, standing beside her, turned sharply, his fist curling before he caught himself. Elsa laid her hand on his arm and shook her head. "No," she whispered. "Not like this." When they left, her hands trembled, but her eyes remained dry. That night, she kneaded dough until her palms ached, each press of her fingers against the flour a silent refusal to hate back. In the summer of 1948, Elsa gave birth to a daughter. The child's cry filled the small farmhouse like a new anthem, raw, insistent, alive. They named her Clara, a name that worked in both languages. When Jack placed the baby in her arms, Elsa felt something she had not felt since before the war, the certainty that love could exist without sides. The baby's tiny fingers wrapped around hers, and for the first time, the word home did not sound borrowed. But history has a way of echoing. News from Europe arrived by mail, letters from relatives she barely knew, describing shortages, rebuilding, silence. "The rubble has flowers now," one line read. "The graves are tended, and people laugh again." Elsa read those words over and over until they blurred. That night, she dreamed she was walking through the ruins of Bremen, only to find her Kansas farmhouse standing there amid the debris, wheat growing through the cracks of cobblestone streets. When she woke, her pillow was damp with tears she didn't remember shedding. Years passed quietly. The world moved on, but the past lingered in small gestures. The way Elsa folded linens with military precision, the way she saved every jar and scrap of paper in case of scarcity. Jack never mocked her for it. He understood that survival was a habit not easily unlearned. When the Cold War began, neighbors whispered again about Germany, this time as part of a new fear. Elsa felt the old eyes on her once more, though now they carried curiosity instead of condemnation. On the 10th anniversary of the war's end, the local paper published a story about immigrant wives who had made new lives in America. A reporter came to photograph Elsa and Jack in front of their farmhouse. As the flash went off, Elsa blinked, caught between two worlds, the camera lens and her memory, the wheat field and the ruins. The photo ran under the headline, "From Enemy to Neighbor." She clipped it and tucked it into her Bible, though she couldn't decide whether it felt like honor or erasure. One autumn evening, long after the harvest, Elsa stepped outside as the sun melted into the horizon. The sky stretched wide and amber, the wheat swaying in rhythmic prayer. Clara played nearby, chasing fireflies with a jar, her laughter echoing across the field. Jack leaned against the porch railing, pipe in hand, watching them both. Elsa tilted her head back, gazing at the sky that seemed to hold both continents at once. In that vastness, she saw Bremen and Kansas stitched together by invisible threads of memory. Two skies, one heart. For the first time, she understood that she hadn't traded one homeland for another. She had built a bridge between them. As darkness deepened, Clara ran toward her, breathless with joy. "Mama, look. I caught one." The jar glowed faintly in her hands, a single firefly blinking like a living star. Elsa crouched, smiling as tears welled in her eyes. "Keep it, main shots," she whispered. "Let it remind you, light can belong to more than one sky." She looked up once more at the stars, bright, infinite, merciful, and felt something lift inside her, weightless and final, as if forgiveness itself had found a place to rest. The wind swept gently through the wheat, and somewhere far away, perhaps over Germany, the same stars blinked back. Which city are you watching our video from? For more powerful stories from World War II, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thank you.